Well, that's embarrassing because she just gave my talk, so I'm just gonna fill in time now. And she did it singing much better than I can, actually. So thank you for that, Lisa. And just recognizing, right, the power of what we believe and where we want to place our belief in hope, in love, in the possibility, and in the living into of good. Now, I love that at the beginning of the year, we tend to sort of have a unity refresher. And so some of you have been around long enough that we'd like to just get a little bit reacquainted with the 5 unity principles here at the beginning of the year, because it really sets a great tone, in my view, and a great foundation for what it is that we want to live into, right? For some of you, it might be a little new for you. And so in the next couple of weeks, we're going to explore the 5 unity principles. Today, we're going to touch on the first 2. And I really invite you to not only listen and feel into what is shared, but to ask the question and allow yourself to ask the question, how does that sit with me? Right? Because just because I'm speaking it, just because I share with you on many occasions how these principles have really reshaped my life and allowed me to live into the kind of stuff that I want to live into, part of the spirit of unity is take what you feel serves you, take what feels right to you, take the things that may feel right to you and may sound comfortable for you and try it out, right? And then the things that you're definitely not ready for or you just don't feel like it's part of what you're moving through or your journey in this moment, just put it to the side. Because at the end of the day, what Unity is here to do, what Unity on the Bay is here to do, is to invite you into questions that will lead you into living the life that you want to live, that you want to experience. And so for all of us, this is really an invitation of just checking in about where we're at with our beliefs and maybe where are some of the areas where we could go a little deeper. Some of the areas where, I may have not been looking at it through the eyes. I may not have been conscious of how this was sort of shaping up for me. And I get to be conscious. That's part of the choice, right? Neil Donald Walsh, invites us. He says, you can live a life of chance or you can live a life of conscious living, right? And, every so often chance is a good thing, but I was at the casino the other day and I'll let you know, I like a more conscious experience. My wallet did too. So, as we're looking at this, and these 5 principles really came about as the Unity movement came about with our co-founders having a spiritual awakening, a spiritual experience, and asking, what the heck was that? And how did we get here? And really answering questions that I think all faith traditions at the core invite us into. What is this greater presence that we sense in our lives? How are we connected to it? How are our lives connected to our faith and our beliefs and our understandings? Who are we? What are we? Why do things happen within our own life, within our experience? And unity, the spirit of unity, is to be a seeker. To be a seeker of the answers to those questions. And to look at life, the spirit of unity is also one of adventure. Right? To see life as the adventure that can bring about a greater understanding of what those questions mean to us. Charles Fillmore, co-founder, when being asked what unity was, and he founded Unity in the late 1800s, he said this: "We have studied many isms, many cults. People of every religion under the sun claim that we either belong to them or have borrowed the best part of our teaching from them." And he says, yup. We have borrowed the best from all religions, and that is the reason that we are called unity. See, they looked at life and their experiences through the lens of the Christian background and the Christian tradition that they were from, and recognized that Christianity really pointed to universal truths that were found in all world religions, that were a part of so many different experiences and lives, and they were really wanting to recognize that we're all trying to answer the same questions and we're all going to get to the same answers at some point, right? And the more that we're able to come together in that, the greater opportunity we will have to live a life of wealth and blessings and miracles and abundance. So the Fillmores were spiritual eclectics. How many of you consider yourself a little bit of a spiritual eclectic? Spiritual adventurer, maybe, right? And from that, over 100 years later, what we tend to say that unity is as a movement is that we're a positive path for spiritual living. And who do we say that Unity on the Bay is? Well, we tell you every so often the three, which we now became the 4 Ps, right? That we are positive, that we are practical, that we are progressive, and that we are powerful when we recognize the truth of who we are and who we are together. But I ask you, whether you're in the room or whether you're watching from home, what is unity to you? What makes unity special to you? Just speak it out loud. What makes unity special to you? Inclusivity. What else? Freedom. What else? What makes unity to you? Oh, it was like a lonely one, and everybody. All right. The third time's the charm, right? So yeah, and that really is important for us to recognize, because we can tell you what we believe Unity on the Bay is, but there's another thing about what Unity on the Bay and what unity is to you and how it has enhanced your life. Now, I can tell you from up here that my own understanding and my own way of looking at this philosophy has just made my life that much richer, that much more blessed. I am able to experience the abundance, the wholeness in a way that I never thought was possible. My life is better as a result of unity. Amen? Amen. How many of you can claim that for yourself? Your life is bigger and better and deeper as a result of what we have found within these walls, within these teachings, within the very presence of God that is alive here, right? And so the spirit of unity is one of those questions and answers. The spirit of unity is about discerning our own answers and then creating a personal belief system from it and continuing to ask the question, is it working for me? Is it working for me? And can it work even better if I go deeper into it? And if it's not working for me, what can I shift? Is there a way for me to understand it in a different light? Or is there a different thing to understand within this? Charles Fillmore, our co-founder, very famously said, this is what I believe right here and right now. And I reserve my right to change my mind. How many of you have changed your mind about God, about humanity and who we are in our own nature, about how life can be? You know, we have that. And many of us are in this very room because we gave ourselves permission to change and shift our mind. Who knows where we will continue to move as a community when we have that openness. And so as we go deeper into these spiritual principles, you know, let's really allow these principles to be alive in us and to be open enough to see how we're living into it, how we might want to live into it, and what it's being asked of us. Today we're going to talk about those first two. And the first one really centers on the nature of God, and the second one, the nature of us as children of God, as expressions of the divine, however you want to see it. Now, Ellen Davenport in the book, The 5 Principles, which, by the way, is the book that's going to be used during our classes beginning next weekend. It's a 3-week class on the 5 unity principles so that you can go deeper into them, you can have conversations around them, and you can have practices around them. So I highly recommend that course. And Ellen Davenport, the author of the book, says this: if I had one wish for the world, it would be that every adult re-examine their view of God at least once per decade. God may not change, but people do, and we outgrow our old concepts. How many old concepts have we not only grown through, but how many of them are we growing through in this very moment? And that spirit of inquisitivity, that spirit of questioning, and that spirit of creating our own faith from these teachings is a very powerful part of unity. So the question is, what is God? And what is the nature of God? And this is the little way that I can, share with you and at the same time give myself space, because the reality is that it's very difficult to explain what God is. because we're using human language. And how many of you have been in conversation where it's like you use one word and the person that you're speaking to has a complete different definition of what that word means, correct? And there are some words that we experience more than really know through through our thinking. Like when we talk about what is love, right? Many more of us can point to expressions of love than to really define what love is. And the same is for God. What's most important is, what have you experienced God to be? When you move through experiences, where is it within that experience that you find God? Now, the Fillmores invited us to recognize that unlike what they had learned, and unlike what many of our faith traditions that are, at least I speak for me, my faith traditions taught me, that God was beyond the personality, right? God wasn't how many of you remember maybe Sunday schools with an idea of God up in a cloud somewhere, looking down, very white with a very long beard, right? I'm here to tell us God has many shades of color and many facial, beards and mustaches and whatever it is, right? So it's really about the experience. Now, the Fillmore said this: God is principle. By principle, we mean definite, exact, and unchangeable. From the teaching of the deity as a person, we have come to believe that God is changeable, that he gets angry with his people and condemns them, that some are chosen or favored above others. We must relieve our minds of these ideas of a personal God ruling over us in an arbitrary, man-like manner. Because the reality is that we took that definition of the deity and of God, and then all of a sudden we use that to judge ourselves, to think of ourselves as unworthy, to start looking at the binary of good and bad, and then starting to put ourselves within that binary about what it is that is good about me, what is bad about me. And a lot of times, because of our own human conditioning, when we would think about it, the bad one out, right? So we had to be in guilt, we had to be in shame, rather than allowing ourselves to recognize that that which is within us that never changes is the very activity and is the very essence of God, and that essence of love, of peace, of joy, it's never changing, it's always at hand. Now, in the past, and I'll say it, I can even speak it now, actually, that we will say that the first principle is that God is absolute good, everywhere present. And sometimes we get stuck in, what do you mean God is absolute good, everywhere present? And what do you mean that God is in everything, so everything is good? Well, there's a difference between absolute good and our relative experience of that good. What I would say is that God underpins all of our experiences and all of the individuals that we live into those experiences with. And I would say that I'm actually at a place of seeing where God is the potential for good that is in everything. Because if you think about any trial or tribulation that you may be going through, whether you think about any individual that you may have a challenge with, could you see that there is a potential for good within that person? Could you see that there's a potential of good within you? And can you see that there's something that can rise up from that trial and tribulation that we can call that good? Maybe not the situation, but what we allow to rise up from that. Now, yesterday, I went to see the movie The Color Purple. How many of you have already seen the new version of The Color Purple? If you haven't, what an amazing, amazing movie. I just really loved it. And I found that it was a little bit more spiritual, I guess, than the first one. I don't know if it's because it's been a few years since I watched the last one, right? The last one came out, or maybe I'm just in another place. But it just felt like the movie itself was showing me some of my own experiences of moving from the place of not feeling worthy and not fully understanding who and what God was, to the place of where Celie moves through her whole life experience to the end where she starts to recognize just how worthy and beautiful. She says, I am here, right? And taking up that space, owning that space of the divinity within us. So there's this part where Celie asks Shug, who's the daughter of a minister, and she's been ostracized from the church as a result of the fact that She believed something different. She wanted to be something that they didn't want her to be, and she just wanted to own who she felt she was meant to be in the world. Has anybody felt a little ostracized sometimes from faith or religion as a result of claiming our oneness, claiming the good that we are, and claiming our own ways of expressing who we are? And so Shug, with her wisdom, is having this conversation with Celie, and Celie says, well, they're talking about God being in everything and being good. And she says, if God is in all, why did he take my babies? She had a couple of kids that were given away. And Shug looks at her and says, it sounds like man did that, not God. Because see, sometimes we just don't realize the godliness that is within us, and we don't act from that place. That doesn't mean that God isn't within us. That doesn't mean that God isn't in everything. It just means that God is the potential that is in everything, and we have the choice to be able to tap into it and allow it and express it in our lives. God is the opportunity and the potential that is in everything. And God is really the faith that we get invited into. And that's where I have my faith when Lisa was talking about hope, right? Like, where are we placing our hope? Are we placing it in the world of circumstances? Are we placing it outside of us? Or are we placing it in the God of our own being? Are we placing it on the potential of good rising up and moving through any trial and tribulation and any difficulty that we or humanity may be experiencing? That kind of faith is what moves mountains, and that kind of faith is what makes these principles actually come alive in our lives. Martha Smock, who was the leader of the Daily Word, our devotional for many decades, says this: the persistence of faith, the persistence of belief in the underlying good, the persistence of the belief in the possibility of overcoming has been the strength that has upheld humanity through trials and troubles and brought it forth into new and living ways. It is that persistence of faith where we find God. It's that persistence of possibility and of hope where God is, and that is where I look to, and that is what I have strength in, and that's the foundation that we all get invited to live our lives through. Now, Sophia is another character in The Color Purple, and she was in jail for 6 years. Then she had to go work with for the racist woman that actually put her in jail. But when she is freed from that, she goes and has dinner with Celie and other individuals. And in that moment, it's one of the times where you start seeing Celie sort of owning her worth and knowing the power that she has within her. And so she speaks up, and then all of a sudden, Sophia speaks up also and says to her that when she was in jail, she was so grateful that Celie was visiting her every single week. And she says, that's how I believe in God, because he lives in you. How many of us take the time to consider that we are the ones where other people get to experience God through? That the way in which we show up in life is the way that people get to know God itself. Now, that's because we ourselves get to embody this essence and presence, and we call that in unity the Christ self. And many times we know the word Christ through our understanding of Jesus Christ. And in unity, we recognize that Jesus was the man, wonderful model of a man, and Christ was that divinity that he so exemplified. Charles Fillmore says this: Christ is a divine man. Jesus is a name that represents an individual expression of the Christ idea. Christ existed long before Jesus. Christ abides in each person as potential perfection. And so just like there was Jesus Christ, there's the Shavana Christ, there's the fake Christ, there's a Juan Christ. Christ is the identity that that was made for us by God, and Juan is the identity that I've sort of created for myself. And my work here on earth is to bring those two into integrity. And how can we live then in integrity with the truth of our being and with the Christ presence, which is the presence of love, which is that which is undefinable, and yet we can experience as God itself. Our work then is one that not only brings us through whatever we may be moving through, but really elevates the consciousness of humanity through the choices that we make. Because when we talk about, well, we're all good, we all have that Christ essence, I know that our minds, our monkey minds tend to go, mine goes there too. Well, what about that person? And what about that person? And what about when I showed up for this? Humans have free will. And Ellen Davenport says, humans were created with free will and we make mistakes. The word sin originally meant missing the mark. Sometimes we miss it by miles. I hope I haven't missed it by miles, but maybe a couple of blocks, maybe a couple of inches, right? And my work is to try to minimize that more and more and to have compassion for myself in doing so. And just because I haven't been able to fully choose God in all instances or others choose God in all instances doesn't mean that the choice isn't there and God is alive in each and every one of us. And so we, instead of thinking about what about them and what about them, my job here is, what about me? What about me? How am I living that Christhood? How am I showing up through an understanding that God is everywhere present and I am one of the ways in which God expresses in the world? And it's a tough awakening that sometimes takes place for us to realize that, but it's one that so many faith traditions invite us into. There's an old Hindu legend that talks about this, and it says that in the beginning all humans were also gods. But we abused our divinity. We abused our power. And so Brahman, the chief god, decided to take that divinity away from the humans and hide it somewhere where he thought they could never find it. And so Brahman called the council of some other, higher level gods to have a conversation about it and help him decide where to hide that divinity. And one of them says, let's bury it deep on the earth. And Brahman says, well, those humans, they'll get to digging and they'll eventually find it. So then Brahman, another god says, well, let's throw it in the deepest part of the sea. And Brahman says, well, those humans, they like to explore, and so they'll eventually be able to go deep enough to find it. Then it says, well, let's put in the highest mountain that we can find. Well, humans, they like to explore and they'll climb, and eventually they'll climb it. They said, I know, because humans are so good about exploring out here. Let's put it within them where they'll not know to look for it. And all the gods said, yes, they'll probably not find it. But here we are, knowing it, trusting it, and really having allowed ourselves to know that divinity lives in all of us. Towards the end of The Color Purple, Celie, after that harsh life that she has, and after those experiences of being loved and being cared for and being guided and really recognizing how worthy she is, she gets to the place of knowing that God in her is always present, and God in her is the answers to any challenge or issue she may be going through. She says at the end, I believe I have inside of me everything that I need to live a bountiful life. Can we get to the place of not only being awakened to that truth, but living from the place of that truth? In John chapter 14, verse 12, it says, very truly I tell you, the one who believes in me will also do the works that I do, and in fact will do greater works than this. And so it's time for us to unleash it upon the world, and that we can have the trust and faith, because God is our own nature and God is in us. And with that, we will get to be in a place of life where more and more we realize that where we normally see brokenness, God is the resilience that shows up. That when we see pain, God is the hope in us for a better tomorrow. That when we see war, when we see famine, when we see hurt, God is the opportunity itself for healing, for love, for nurturing, and is the healing that takes place through us. That God is the energy and the consciousness of living and seeing and experiencing life through the eyes of possibility and potential rather than judgment and limitation, that God is the heaven here on earth that we are ushering in. And so I ask one more time, isn't it time that we fully live it? And isn't it time that we fully allow that which we know God to be in the world through each and every one of us? That is the first unity principle, the second unity principle, the fifth unity principle. It's not enough to know these principles. We got to start acting like we do. And today is the day for right action. Namaste, everyone. Thank you. Thank you for visiting our YouTube channel. We post new videos every week to keep you positive, present, and inspired to your divinity. So now please click on the subscribe button below and hit the notification bell. Remember to share this with your friends and family. We love you, we behold the Christ in you, and we see you doing great things.